Ford spent decades telling the world exactly what the Bronco was: trails, open skies, a truck for people who actually went places. It was a careful image. And on one Friday evening in June 1994, 95 million people watched it unravel. Not on a trail, but on a Los Angeles freeway, moving at 35 miles per hour, with police cruisers behind it and helicopters overhead. There was no campaign, no media buy, but the audience was already there. 2 years later, Ford ended production. No farewell edition, no explanation. After 30 years, the Bronco simply stopped. So what changed in those 2 years? And what did that one evening do to everything Ford had built around it? To understand, we have to go back to the very beginning. The Bronco started in 1966 with a simple idea: 2 doors, a removable top, a body bolted to a proper ladder frame, built to go places most vehicles couldn't follow. That idea didn't change much across 5 generations. By the time the 5th generation arrived for 1992, Ford had refined it into something genuinely substantial. Full-size, 2-door, body-on-frame, platform designation U15, built at the Michigan truck plant in Wayne alongside the F150 on shared tooling. That last detail matters more than it sounds. Under the hood, 2 engine choices. The 5.0-liter Windsor V8, producing around 185 horsepower, and the 5.8-liter Windsor, producing somewhere between 200 and 210 horsepower depending on the model year. Both share the same basic architecture: iron block, iron heads, pushrod overhead valve design, a timing chain, not a belt, hydraulic valve lifters that need no adjustment. The Windsor family is an engine Ford first put into production in 1962. The same fundamental design, running continuously for decades, refined but never reinvented. Consider what that engine number means in a different context. The pursuit vehicle on June 17, 1994, carried a VIN beginning with 1 FMEU15. To a Ford parts technician, that sequence identifies a Michigan-built 5th-generation Bronco with a 5.8-liter Windsor under the hood. To the rest of the world, it became the serial number of the most watched vehicle in American television history. The same iron block, the same pushrod design. One of them ended up somewhere else entirely. The front suspension is a Ford-specific design called Twin I-beam, developed in 1965 and used on F-Series trucks ever since. 2 longitudinal I-beam arms extend from a shared pivot point to the wheel hubs, 1 per side. It isn't true independent suspension. It isn't a solid axle either. It sits deliberately between the two, engineered for truck duty, where durability under load matters more than handling refinement. Out back, a solid rear axle. Dana 44, leaf springs. Simple, strong. The same basic axle specification shared with the Jeep CJ and early Wrangler, which would matter later for parts availability. The transmission of choice was the E40D4 speed automatic, the same electronically controlled overdrive unit Ford fitted to the F250 heavy-duty pickup. The Bronco rarely came close to stressing it. And then there was the removable fiberglass rear top, a feature present on every Bronco since 1966. 30 years of the same basic configuration, generation after generation. The fiberglass doesn't rust. 30-year-old tops in good condition are still serviceable today. This was not a compromised machine. It was overbuilt in the best sense, sharing its bones with the best-selling truck in America and carrying an engine family that had been in production for 3 decades. The Bronco didn't exist in isolation. By 1992, Ford had 2 SUVs doing 2 very different jobs, and the distinction between them tells you everything about where the industry was heading. The Explorer had arrived for 1991, 4 doors, a higher roofline, built on a modified Ranger platform with a unibody-derived structure. It was aimed squarely at families who wanted the feel of a utility vehicle without the compromises of a traditional truck. Softer ride, more interior room, easier to get in and out of. The Explorer sold in numbers the Bronco could never approach. So Ford had the Explorer for the school run and the Bronco for the trail. On paper, that held together. The Bronco's direct competitor wasn't the Explorer. It was the Chevrolet K5 Blazer. same basic format, full-size body on frame, 2 doors, V8 engine, solid axles, removable top, the same buyer, the same philosophy, the same market position. If you wanted a traditional full-size 2-door SUV in the early 90s, you were choosing between these two trucks. The difference wasn't just on paper, it was physical. Open an Explorer's door and you felt plastic, light, smooth-edged, designed for a parking garage and a school run. Open a Bronco's door and you felt something else. Heavy chrome, solid resistance, the kind of latch that closed with a sound that said this thing is built to take a hit. One truck was made to be easy, the other was made to last. Ford leaned into that identity deliberately. The Eddie Bauer edition arrived as a factory trim package developed in collaboration with the Seattle outdoor apparel company of the same name. Specific two-tone exterior color combinations. Eddie Bauer badging on the door panels. A particular interior treatment. It was a signal about who Ford believed was buying this truck. Not contractors, not fleet operators, outdoor enthusiasts, people who associated vehicles with recreation rather than pure utility. Annual Bronco production sat at roughly 20,000 to 25,000 units through the early 90s. Modest but profitable, because the platform it shared with the F-150 meant the incremental cost of building each Bronco was lower than it would have been for a standalone product. Ford wasn't carrying the full engineering burden of a dedicated vehicle. It was building a variation on something it was already making every day on the same lines. The problem wasn't profitability, the problem was direction. The growing SUV market wasn't growing the Bronco's way. Volume was moving toward 4-door variants, toward vehicles that could carry more passengers, more cargo, more of what a family actually needed. The Explorer understood this. The Bronco, by design, could not answer that question. 2 doors meant 2 rows. There was no version of the 5th generation that added a 3rd row or a rear door because the architecture simply didn't allow it. Ford's product planners already knew this. The data was clear, and it was pointing toward a vehicle the Bronco would never be. What makes the timing significant is this. Ford was already developing the Bronco's replacement before the Bronco had its most famous moment. The decision to move on was already written into the product plan. What arrived in June 1994 was something else entirely. Ford didn't wake up on June 18, 1994, and decide to kill the Bronco. That decision was already made. The engineering approvals, the platform commitments, the product planning paperwork, all of it was already in motion before that freeway ever appeared on television. The vehicle that would replace the Bronco was called the Expedition. 4 doors, full size, body on frame, built on the redesigned F-150 platform that Ford was simultaneously developing for the 1997 model year. 3-row seating, enough interior space to carry a family and their gear without compromise. Everything the Bronco structurally couldn't be. The Expedition launched for 1997. That date is the key to understanding everything that follows. Building a full-size truck platform from program approval to production takes roughly 4 to 5 years. New platform, new body structure, new tooling across multiple plants. That's not speculation, that's the documented development timeline for major vehicle programs at American manufacturers in the 90s. Work backwards from 1997, and the math lands somewhere around 1992 or 1993. That's when Ford's product planners would have formally approved the Expedition program. That's when engineering teams started converting market research into steel. The pursuit happened in June 1994. By that point, the Expedition's development was already well underway. Ford's stated rationale for the transition was straightforward. The market wanted 4 doors. It wanted more seating. It wanted more cargo space. The Explorer had proven that families would buy a large Ford SUV in enormous numbers if it offered what they actually needed. The Bronco's 2-door format had no answer for any of those requirements. You cannot add a rear door to a 2-door body on frame SUV without rebuilding the entire vehicle from the ground up. That's not a marketing problem. That's a geometry problem. There's another signal embedded in the 5th generation's production history that confirms the trajectory. In 4 years of production, from 1992 through 1995, Ford made no meaningful mechanical changes to the truck. No powertrain updates, no suspension revisions, no structural improvements. The only change across the entire 5th generation run was the introduction of OBD2 compliant engine management for the 1996 model year, the Bronco's final year of production. And that wasn't a choice. That was a federal emissions compliance requirement. The single act of investment in the Bronco's final year was one Ford had no option to avoid. That absence of development is its own kind of statement. When a manufacturer believes in a vehicle's future, it invests in updates, new engine calibrations, suspension tuning, interior refreshes, safety upgrades. None of that happened here. The fifth-generation Bronco arrived in 1992 and left in 1996 mechanically identical, because Ford wasn't building toward a sixth generation. It was managing an exit. No farewell edition was planned, no heritage package, no limited run to mark the end of a 30-year nameplate. The 1996 Bronco simply reached the end of its scheduled production and stopped. So when people say the pursuit killed the Bronco, the timeline says something more precise. The Bronco was already scheduled to end. The expedition was already coming. What the pursuit did was something different, something harder to quantify but no less real. It changed what the Bronco meant. And that change, unlike the truck itself, had no scheduled end date. It just kept going, through the trial, through the verdict, through 2 decades of used truck listings and quiet barn finds, until the market eventually decided what to do with it. June 17, 1994, was a Friday. The NBA Finals were scheduled for that evening. Game 5, New York Knicks against the Houston Rockets. NBC had the broadcast rights and tens of millions of viewers ready. Then Al Cowlings drove onto the 405 freeway, and the game became secondary. The vehicle was a white 1993 Ford Bronco, registered to Al Cowlings, O.J. Simpson's former teammate and longtime friend. Not a 1994 model, despite what most people still assume. The model year is verifiable from the vehicle identification number and from the Los Angeles County records that became part of the public trial documentation. The pursuit happened in 1994, but the truck was a 1993. That distinction matters to anyone who has spent time with Ford's production records, even if it never mattered to the 95 million people watching. 95 million. The number gets cited so often it starts to lose its weight. So consider it differently. The Super Bowl that January drew around 95 million viewers. The O.J. pursuit drew a Super Bowl-sized audience on a Friday evening in June, with less than an hour of warning for a truck traveling at roughly 35 miles per hour. NBC split its screen. The basketball game continued in one corner. The Bronco moved through the other. Most viewers, by all contemporaneous accounts, were watching the truck. What made it impossible to stop watching wasn't speed. It wasn't violence. It was the opposite of both. It was silence. 95 million people watching a 5.8-liter V8 turnover at idle, pulling a 4,000-pound truck through Los Angeles at roughly the speed of a bicycle. No tire screech, no engine roar, just the steady, unhurried hum of an engine that had no idea what it was carrying or what it was doing to the name on its tailgate. Dozens of police cruisers followed at a respectful distance, lights on, keeping pace with something a bicycle could have challenged. And yet the cameras stayed locked on it for nearly 2 hours. O.J. Simpson was in the back. Cowlings was driving. Simpson, by his own account relayed through Cowlings during the pursuit, was holding a gun to his own head. The police knew this. The negotiators on the radio knew this. The millions of people watching didn't know exactly what was happening inside that white truck, only that something was, and that it might end badly at any moment. It didn't end badly. The Bronco returned to Simpson's Brentwood estate. Simpson surrendered. The event resolved without the violence that had felt imminent for 90 minutes of live television. But the Bronco never left. Ford's response, publicly, was silence. No press release, no statement about the vehicle's relationship to the pursuit, no acknowledgement that the most watched truck in television history happened to carry their name on the tailgate. The product planning for the expedition continued on its existing timeline. No production changes were made to the 1994 or 1995 Bronco as a result of what happened that evening. What changed was harder to document and impossible to undo. The murder trial began in January 1995. It ran for 9 months. And in that courtroom, broadcast daily to an audience that remained enormous throughout, the Bronco returned. The vehicle's interior, its documented movements in the days before the murders, the white truck on the freeway, replayed in evidence, replayed in testimony, replayed in the evening news recap every time the trial produced a new development. By the time the verdict arrived in October 1995, the The Bronco had spent more than a year as a recurring presence in American living rooms. Not as a truck, not as a product, as a symbol of something unresolved and deeply uncomfortable. Sales were already declining before June 17th. The market shift toward four-door SUVs was already underway. The Expedition was already coming. But the Bronco now carried something no marketing campaign could address and no product refresh could remove. It carried that freeway, and it would carry it forever. Ford never said the pursuit changed anything. That silence is itself a kind of answer. No internal communications were released to the public connecting the Bronco's discontinuation to what happened on June 17th. No memo, no press conference. No acknowledgement that the most watched vehicle in American television history was one of theirs, and that this created a problem. The official posture was no posture at all. Ford said nothing, changed nothing, and let the Expedition's development continue on the timeline it had always been on. But something did change, and it's visible if you know where to look. The outdoor capability themes that had defined Bronco advertising through the late 80s and into the early 90s quietly disappeared from the final years of marketing. The rugged terrain, the trails, the Eddie Bauer lifestyle imagery that positioned this truck as the choice of people who actually use their vehicles outdoors. That language didn't pivot or evolve, it simply stopped being prominent. The Bronco's final years in showrooms were met with advertising that grew quieter, less committed, more like a product being managed toward the exit than one being championed toward a future. You don't rehabilitate a brand association in 2 years, not one this large and this public. Think about what Ford would have needed to do. The Bronco's outdoor identity had been built carefully over decades. The Eddie Bauer co-branding, the trail-capable hardware, the advertising that said this truck is for people who go places. All of that goodwill existed because the truck had earned it through consistent messaging and genuine capability. To rebuild that association after June 1994 would have required years of sustained investment, new campaigns, new imagery, new context that placed the Bronco somewhere other than a Los Angeles freeway. Ford would have needed to fight the most memorable television moment any vehicle had ever received and replace that memory with something else entirely. There was no business case for that fight. The Expedition was already coming. Why invest in rehabilitating a nameplate you're retiring in 2 years? So the Bronco went quietly. No farewell edition, no limited run commemorating 30 years of continuous production. The 1996 model year arrived with its OBD2 engine management, the only change Ford was legally required to make, and then the line stopped. The tooling was repurposed. The Michigan truck plant moved on to the F-150 and eventually to the Expedition that had been planned all along. What the pursuit actually killed wasn't the Bronco's production. That was already decided. What it killed was any chance the Bronco had of leaving on its own terms. A vehicle that ends its run after 30 years of genuine capability deserves a certain kind of exit. The Ford Mustang gets anniversary editions. The F-150 gets heritage trim packages. Vehicles with long histories and loyal buyers tend to get acknowledged when their time ends. The Bronco got nothing. Because acknowledging the Bronco's history in 1996 meant acknowledging a history that now included that freeway. Any farewell campaign, any heritage package, any tribute to 30 years of the same removable top and the same solid rear axle would have run directly into the image that 95 million people still carried in their heads. The causal claim, that the pursuit caused Ford to kill the Bronco, doesn't hold up against the timeline. The Expedition's development started before June 1994. The market was moving before June 1994. The decision was made before June 1994. But the Bronco's ability to be remembered as anything other than that white truck, that slow freeway, that Friday evening in June, that died on June 17, 1994. And that loss was permanent. The Bronco stopped being made in 1996. The engineering inside it did not stop mattering. Start with the engine. The 5.8-liter Windsor V8 in the last Bronco built shares its fundamental architecture with an engine Ford first put into a 1962 Fairlane. Same iron block, same pushrod overhead valve design, same hydraulic lifters that need no adjustment and ask for nothing beyond regular oil changes. The Windsor family ran continuously from 1962 through approximately 2001 across Ford's trucks, cars, and vans simultaneously. That is 39 years of the same basic design, refined in detail but never replaced at its core. An engine family that long in production doesn't survive on nostalgia. It survives because the parts ecosystem built around it is too large and too embedded in the supply chain to disappear quietly. Every auto parts store in America stocks Windsor V8 components as standard inventory, not as specialty items, because the F-150, the Mustang GT, the Crown Victoria, and the Econoline van all drew from the same family across overlapping decades. The Bronco benefits from all of that demand without needing to contribute much of its own. The transmission tells the same story. The E40D 4-speed automatic in the 5th generation Bronco is the identical unit Ford fitted to the F250 heavy-duty pickup. The F250 is heavier, it tows more. It operates under sustained loads that the Bronco's lighter empty weight rarely approached. So the E40D's specifications, its torque converter, its band settings, its fluid capacity, were all developed for a harder duty cycle than most Broncos ever saw. That built-in margin is not accidental. It's the natural consequence of sharing components with a heavier application, and it means the Bronco's transmission was running well within its designed limits for most of its working life. The Dana 44 rear axle extends the parts network further still. Ford wasn't the only manufacturer to specify it. Jeep used it in the CJ series and in early Wranglers. Chevrolet specified it in the K Blazer. Multiple manufacturers across multiple decades all sourced from the same Dana production lines. A Bronco owner sourcing differential bearings or axle seals can draw on the Jeep off-road aftermarket, the Chevrolet truck aftermarket, and Ford-specific suppliers simultaneously. The combined demand from all those applications keeps Dana 44 components available at prices that reflect a broad market, not a niche one. The removable fiberglass rear top carries its own quiet advantage. Steel rusts, fiberglass doesn't. The top's attachment points at the B-pillar weather strip are the primary maintenance concern over time, and the ceiling geometry is Bronco-specific. But the top panel itself survives decades of temperature cycling and ultraviolet exposure without the corrosion that compromises steel body panels. 30-year-old tops in good condition are still being fitted to restored trucks today. And then there is the factory itself. The Michigan truck plant built the Bronco and the F-150 on the same production lines. Same frame, same engine options, same transmission, many of the same suspension components. A shop that services F-150 trucks from this era already has the knowledge, the tooling, and the familiarity to work on a Bronco without additional training. The Bronco's serviceability was never a standalone achievement. It was inherited from the most serviced truck platform in America. The name was retired. The machines underneath it were not. They kept running, kept finding parts, kept being maintained by mechanics who had never worked on a Bronco specifically, but knew exactly what they were looking at when one rolled in. The Bronco name was gone from new vehicle production for 24 years. From 1997 through 2020, Ford built no Bronco. The Michigan truck plant moved on. The tooling was repurposed. The 5th generation's production line became part of the F-150's expanding footprint, and the two-door full-size SUV quietly became a category that no major American manufacturer bothered to fill. For most of those 24 years, these were simply old trucks. You could find a 5th generation Bronco for $3,000 behind a barn in Idaho, or rusting quietly in a field somewhere in the Southwest. The cultural weight had faded. The trial had faded. The freeway had faded. They were just used trucks from the 90s that the market had largely moved past. Then in 2020, Ford announced the 6th generation. 2 doors and 4 doors, body on frame, available with a removable top, aimed directly at the Jeep Wrangler's buyer base in a segment that had gone largely uncontested for 2 decades. The announcement generated a level of consumer interest that surprised even Ford's internal projections. Reservation lists filled quickly. The nameplate, dormant since 1996, turned out to carry more weight than anyone had formally measured. And something unexpected happened to the trucks sitting in garages and fields for the previous 2 decades. Auction records at Bring a Trailer and Barrett-Jackson began documenting price movement in 5th generation Broncos almost immediately after the 6th generation announcement. Low-mileage examples that had traded quietly within the enthusiast community started attracting broader attention and considerably higher bids. The cultural association that had haunted the truck through its final years was now working differently. The same freeway, the same white paint, the same model year, but now filtered through 2 decades of distance and a renewed national conversation about the Bronco name. The collector market sorted itself into 2 distinct populations, and the division is worth understanding. The first group is the off-road community. These buyers value the 5th generation for what it actually is mechanically. Solid rear axle, twin I-beam front end, short wheelbase with useful approach and departure angles, a parts ecosystem that draws on Ford, Jeep, and Chevrolet sourcing simultaneously. For this group, the cultural history is secondary. What matters is the Dana 44, the Windsor V8, and the frame shared with the best-selling truck in America. The second group is buying the symbol, white examples specifically, 5th generation specifically. The same configuration that appeared on the 405 freeway on June 17, 1994. Documented auction results confirm that white 5th generation Broncos command premiums that other colors simply do not. The cultural event that Ford couldn't market around in 1995 became, over time, a measurable auction variable. Ford responded to the 6th generation success with something the 5th generation never received while it was still in production. A heritage parts program, announced through Ford Performance, providing factory specification restoration components for original Bronco generations through authorized channels. The 6th generation's commercial success funded the infrastructure to keep the 5th generation alive. The truck that left with no farewell edition, no anniversary package, no acknowledgement of its 30-year run, now had OEM specification parts available again through Ford's own supply chain. The 5th generation Ford Bronco was not killed by a police chase. That part of the story is worth saying plainly, because the simpler version has repeated itself for 30 years and the timeline doesn't support it. The Expedition was already in development. The market was already moving toward 4 doors, more seating, more space. Ford's product planners had already made the call, somewhere around 1992 or 1993, that the Bronco's 2-door architecture had no future in the direction the family SUV segment was heading. The pursuit happened in June 1994. By that point, the decision was made. The engineering teams were already converting the 1997 F-150 platform into the vehicle that would replace everything the Bronco had been. So the chase didn't end the Bronco. What it did was something more precise and more permanent. It took a vehicle already walking toward the exit and made sure it could never walk back in. A 30-year nameplate deserved a different kind of ending. The removable fiberglass top that had been a feature of every generation since 1966. The Windsor V8 that traced its iron block architecture back to a 1962 Fairlane. The Dana 44 axle that connected the Bronco's parts ecosystem to the Jeep and Chevrolet off-road communities simultaneously. The twin I-beam front suspension that Ford developed in 1965 and put on no other vehicle in the automotive world. All of it genuinely substantial. All of it genuinely capable. None of it acknowledged when the line finally stopped. Because acknowledging the Bronco's history in 1996 meant acknowledging a history that now included that freeway. And there was no version of that conversation Ford could afford to have. The engineering was sound. The platform was shared with the best-selling truck in America. The Windsor V8 is still on parts store shelves today, not as a specialty item but as standard stock, because the demand from 39 years of continuous production across Ford's cars, trucks, and vans never really went away. What the Bronco lost wasn't its capability. It lost the ability to be seen as anything other than that white truck on that slow freeway on that Friday evening in June. And that association, the one Ford never commented on and never addressed, turned out to be the most durable thing the 5th generation ever produced. The name survived. The machines survived. The collector market eventually decided what all of it was worth, and it turned out to be more than Ford had accounted for when it quietly closed the line in 1996. The story survived too, which is why, almost 30 years later, a white 5th generation Bronco at auction sells for a premium that other colors don't command. Because the most watched vehicle in American television history left a mark that no amount of time or distance has fully removed. It just took a while for that mark to start working in the Bronco's favor, instead of against it. Click on this next video. In 1998, Toyota faced an impossible choice between the past and the future. The Land Cruiser 100 carried a V8 engine, a build quality that bordered on over-engineered, and a legacy forged in terrain that breaks lesser machines. It's a story worth knowing.